Hey everyone, in this tutorial I'm going to walk you through a step-by-step process on how to build a web application that will leverage a weather data API and transform simple location inputs into rich actionable weather data. We're going to start with the basics of weather API integration and work our way up to a fully functional dashboard that updates in real time. And hopefully by the end of it, you'll have the skills to implement a weather responsive feature into your own web applications. Now, by the end of this tutorial, you would have built something exactly like this, a weather dashboard where you can input any sort of city name, and when you press enter or click the search button, it will return to you the weather details, and in those weather details, you will see things such as what it feels like, the humidity, wind speeds, pressure, visibility, even UV index. Now, as you can see, if we search Melbourne, for example, UV index is at 5, partly cloudy, and your background will change based off of what the return is on the forecast and what it's showing. So if it's partly cloudy or if it's raining, it'll update the background as well and give you our date and time, tell you what kind of rain it is, light rain, if it's partly cloudy, full cloudy, or sunny. So this general area right here will be what we're focusing on. First things first, we are going to need a free weather data API. Now, to do that, I usually just use APILayer. They have a great marketplace full of different kinds of APIs that you can search from. But for us, we are just going to be searching for a weather one. Here you go, Weatherstack. So we can click on View API here. And this should take us to, see, subscribe for free. So this should take us to their website. And now here they show you the different pricing plans that they have. We're just going to stick with the free one. But as you can see, the standard professional business, they all have some upgraded features that you can use, such as hour-by-hour data, full historical data, 7-day forecasts, languages, even bulk queries. But we are just going to stick with the real-time weather and our 100 free calls. So to do that, we just want to click at the top right, sign up for free. And then once you fill this out, you will be taken to your dashboard. So now that we've created our account, this is what our dashboard will look like. As you can see, our API access key is right here in the middle of the screen. And we are able to also see documentation just by clicking on the documentation button. And this is a page full of documentation that you can go through on your own time and look at how this API works. So now that we have our API key, let's go ahead and start with making a API request just to test what our return looks like. Now, to do that, we want to create a new repository or a new folder. We will do so right over here. Click on new folder, and we will just call it weather dashboard. Perfect. Select folder. Now, in this folder, we're going to create a new file and just call it first request.js. Create that file. Okay, to start, let's start with using Node fetch. So since we're using Node.js for our project here, we are going to need to use fetch in order to make our HTTP requests to Weatherstack's API. So let's just go ahead and declare our fetch. All right, perfect. Now, next we want to create a new file, and we're going to call this .env. Now, in here, we are going to store our API key, and we're going to just call it access_key, all capitals. We're going to come over here, select our API key, and paste it in here. We're going to save that, and then we're going to create another file called .getignore. Now, what this is going to do is when we upload our files onto GitHub, we are purposely going to ignore our env file because we do not want to be leaking our API key. Now we're going to go back here and we are going to now call a constant for our access key or our API key. But we are going to get this process.env.access_key. And then we also want to require, and then we're going to do .env.config here. Perfect. Let me just don't forget your semicolons. And then now that we have our access key loaded in and have fetch declared, we are going to now declare our location. And we're going to do that with just location. And we are just going to, for now, just do New York. Just do New York. That will be our test subject for now. Perfect. Now that we have our access key, our location, and we have our required libraries, let's now just make our API request using fetch. So we can do fetch, and then in here we want to add our API endpoint, which we can find on Weatherstack's website. If we just go to documentation, scroll down right here, you have your API request link. This URL is what we want. So we're going to copy this over, come back over here, we're going to paste it, we're going to get rid of these white spaces just for the time so that we can utilize our own variables and make it more dynamic. Perfect. Now here we want to delete this because we don't want our API key to be leaked anywhere, and we are just going to use our variable instead, access key, and we are going to do the same thing with our query or a location just because we want it to be dynamic location. Perfect. Now we are going to do a .then, and for our response, and then response.json, we are going to do another then, and for the data that we get in JSON, we are going to want to console log our weather data. We're going to want to console log our weather data just so we can see what we get in return. Perfect. So now if we do another console.log and we want to stringify, hold on, oops, it's json.stringify, and we want to stringify our data. Don't forget your semicolons, and that should be it. And then you know what? Honestly, we can do a catch, and then we can catch any errors if we do get any. And then we want to console.error, and then we want to do just to print out our error. Okay, perfect. Now we want to save that. So now we have our first request. So the first thing we want to do is open up terminal, and we want to first install our dependencies. So npm install, and we want to install node fetch because we are using node fetch. And then we also want to install .env because we are using .env as well to store our API key. Now, once we have these installed, we can now go ahead and do add node, and we can do first-request.js. Perfect. Let me full screen this so you can get a better look at it. So as you can see, this is the API return data. Now in this data, you can see things such as our request. So our city, you have our city, country, it gives you region, it gives you longitude, latitude, time zone, weather codes. It even gives you some the symbols for the weather icon, right? Black low cloud. So it pretty much gives you all the information that you need. It tells you when your sunset is, your sunrise is, it tells you wind speed, wind degree, wind direction, pressure, precipitation, humidity, cloud coverage, everything, literally everything. It gives you CO, carbon dioxide, it gives you NO2, like every single thing that you can use for air quality, it gives you. So this data is very valuable in a web application if you need to display any type of data that has anything to do with weather, right? You can get all of your data from here based off of the location that you give it. So now that that's done, let's build something a lot better, something that we can visualize this data that we get with. So, so it's just going to be a sort of a dashboard that will update in real time and include visualizations here and there, of key weather metrics that we are given through this JSON data. Now to start, let's create a new file and call this server.js. Now this is going to be our backend file, and we will be essentially calling our endpoint, creating our Express app endpoints here, for things like serving our front end files, right? And also handling the requests for the current weather data for specific locations, and even, retrieving forecast data for locations and stuff like that. We're going to be handling all of our backend functions in this file. So I'm going to get right into the coding aspect of it. I'm going to speed it up. I will take some cuts or some breaks in between my coding just to explain what I'm doing. If you need to slow it down or pause it, feel free to do so. But for now, I will talk to you guys in a bit. So here I just imported the necessary packages that we're going to need for our backend service. Now we are going to initialize the Express app and set up some static files to serve our front end for our front end files. So now that we have initialized our Express app and set up static file serving for our front end files, as you can see, we are going to do it in a directory of public. So here we want to create a new folder and call it public. And in here, we will be adding our index.html files and our app.js files. But for now, we're going to continue doing the backend work. Now I'm going to set up the endpoint to get our weather data for our location. And this is going to be work. And this is going to work whether they input an IP address, a coordinates, longitude, latitude coordinates, or even just the name of the city. So we're going to make it work for everything. And this endpoint, since the way our API functions is if we even input an IP address, longitude, latitude coordinates, or even just the name of the city, it will return us the data that we want for that exact input. So now this endpoint that we just created will handle requests for current weather data for a specific location. And our location can be anywhere from a IP address, coordinates, or even just a zip code, for example, or even a postal code or zip code, and then also a location name such as a city. Now I'm going to serve the main HTML file. Now these lines set up a route for the home page and start the server on our specified port. And so our backend services, our backend is now done. So our backend server is finished, and we've added an endpoint for looking up the weather data for that specific location as well. So when the user visits and inputs a location, whether it's through an IP address, coordinates, zip code, or even a location name, it'll return and serve the front end HTML, CSS files and update those files with the JSON data that we are requesting. So for your front end, let's go into our public folder here, and we will create a new file and call it index.html. Now here I am going to just add a bunch of HTML. I'm going to speed it up. No need to really explain it. You can just present the data how you want on your front end, and I will continue with the app.js afterwards and show you guys how to dynamically update the front end. So if you guys want to just slow the video down or stick along, you can also check out the GitHub to just copy paste it if you want from my index.html from the GitHub repository. But yeah, I will be right back. All right, so now that I've built a small little front end here with a few containers to populate our weather details and then also add our extra weather details as well, let's start by seeing if we can see what this pops up with. So to do that, we want to be able to run our node server. So that way we can just sort of see what we're doing at the same time. Now, to do that, we need to install some of our dependencies. So we need to do an npm install, and we need express. We're going to need node-fetch at 2. We're going to need .env, and then I think that should be it. So let's install those packages and dependencies. And then now we need to do a node server dot. All right, so my mistake, I forgot to add a colon right after our local host, right after the port. So you want to just go back to your server.js at the bottom and add a colon here at the bottom for our listening port. And then we want to, just run Node.js again. We want to save that first. Let's save this as well. Actually, let's save our files. Let's run this, and then we want to open it. And as you can see, this is sort of what we have going for us based off of as you can see, the front end that we have made so far. So here, for example, now if I type like New York, so as you can see now, we have our little dashboard set up here. So if we write like, for example, Boston, nothing's going to happen, right? Now, in order for us to connect our front end to our server, we need to create an app.js file. And so this file will essentially be our connection between the front end and our back end. And it'll add functionality in between the two. Now, before I do that, I'm going to add a little bit of CSS. I did add a style CSS file here earlier. I'm going to pause the video and just add that now, just because it's boring stuff. There's no point in really watching it. But if you want the file, you can just go to my GitHub repository. Link will be in the description below, and just copy paste it. Okay, and that is done. So now let's get back to creating our app.js. So under your public folder, you want to create a new file called app.js. And now here, we're going to start off with getting our references for all of our HTML elements that we need to interact with. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so now that we have declared our DOM elements, I'm going to add a few images that our background will have pop up. There's some free pictures if you want the links for them as well. Again, check my GitHub repository. But anyways, yeah. Okay, now let's create a function to determine what background image we want to use based on the weather code that we actually get from our request. Because as you know, the JSON that we get returns certain weather code. So based on the weather code that we get from our request from the JSON data, we will display the background image that we want. Okay, so now that we have our section that defines background images for different weather conditions and a function to select the appropriate image based off of the weather code that we get in return, we can now continue to creating a function to get our weather data from our endpoint, our server-side endpoint, of course. Okay, so now that we've created this function to handle our API request to get the current weather from our backend, we can continue to create a function to update the UI. So now based off of this, this return value that we get, this JSON value, we will now be able to update the UI with the data that we are returning. Okay, so this code here, the section that I wrote up, this code updates the UI with the current weather information, including location, temperature, and our weather description. Now we are going to start with the other weather details, such as wind speed, what it feels like, humidity, and whatnot. So now I'm going to go into that one. All right, so now that we have implemented this part of the function, which displays additional weather details like the humidity, wind speed, and pressure, now we can go on and handle our search button and create a function to handle the search button for when the user presses it or hits enter with the entered input. So now this function will process the user's search request and update the UI with the retrieved data from their input location. So we have get weather data with the location that they inputted, and then if there is a weather data, if there's a return object, then we will update the UI with that return. And now we can add an event listener for the search button on click. And then we can also add an event listener for a key press for enter as well. Okay, so these event listeners connect the UI buttons and the input field to our JavaScript functions. And so now we should be able to run our node server.js. And now we have our front end working. Let me pull this over here. And here, if we type in Boston, for example, and hit search, it won't work. As per usual, it won't work. So let's see what we have here. So it looks like we have a type error reading trim at handle search. Okay. Okay, I'm not sure why I accidentally put aria value max. That's not supposed to be that. It's just supposed to be value. Let's fix that. I just it just autocorrects. See, should just be value. Anyways, if you click save, let's restart this node server.js. Open it again. Perfect. And now we should be able to type in Boston and hit enter, and ta-da! There you have it. So Boston feels like -1, 70 humidity, 15 wind pressure, pressure is this, visibility is this. Now let me see if I can add some extra metrics to this so that way these numbers just make a lot more sense. All right, so here we want to change our feels like to have a degrees Celsius symbol next to it. And then we want our humidity to be in a percentage because that's what it will be. So we can do a percentage sign here. And then our wind speed will be kilometers per hour. But we want to do kilometers an hour, but we also want to add in our wind direction as well. So let's do data dot current dot wind underscore direction. So this will be kilometers an hour in the direction that it's going in. And then our pressure will be MB. And then our visibility will be in kilometers. So we have a certain amount of kilometers in visibility. And then our UV index is just our UV index. So let's save this and let's restart. So just type in node server.js again, hit enter. We come back over here. Let's type in Boston again, and ta-da. So now this makes a lot more sense. We have 11 kilometers of visibility, feels like -1 degree Celsius, 70% humidity. Our wind is 15 kilometers an hour going southeast. We have a 1032 MB of pressure, a visibility again, and whatnot. So now we have our date and our actual temperature on the left side here, and as well as that nice little background in our city and country as well. And then a little description as well. So light snow and ice pallets. Now, if we try New York has a slight overcast, 7 degrees, feels like 3 degrees, 76% humidity, 21 degrees. So we can even do Cancun. Let's try Cancun. Oh, that's Cancun, not Cancun. Cancun, Mexico also have an overcast, 27 degrees, 31 degrees, feels like 31 degrees, 91% humidity. So as you can see, there doesn't seem to be a UV index. I think it's just because it's nighttime now. So let's try Melbourne. Melbourne, just so you guys can see the, yeah, so there you go. UV index of 6, partly cloudy, 20 degrees. Feels like 20 degrees, 53% humidity. So as you can see, we have completed it. So there you have it. Now, thank you guys for sticking along. I hope this tutorial helped you out. I hope it showed you how you can manipulate weather data APIs and use them in your own web applications in order to, who knows, create something useful for whatever application that you are working on and utilize the data that you get from these API endpoints. Now, obviously, if you have the paid versions of these APIs, they give you a lot more information, such as astronomy data, hour by hour data, full historical data, 7-day forecasts. You know, you can even do bulk queries. So it fully depends on what you're trying to accomplish on your web application or even any application in general when you use these API endpoints. And so I hope this tutorial was helpful to you guys. Thank you guys so much for staying tuned. Thank you guys so much for staying tuned in. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.